Hello. Thank you for tuning into the HOPECAST. We're so glad you're here. This is, of course, a podcast from Hope Church in Richmond. My name is Jake, and I'm the communications manager here. So normally I'm behind the camera, not in front of the mic. This is not my normal spot, but I'm glad to be here with Senior Pastor David Dwight. A couple things about David. I just kind of want to go in case people don't know.
Oh, wait, now I'm curious.
No, in case
what
people...
are a couple of things about David you're going to say?
Okay, here we go. So, got your doctorate at Gordon Conwell.
Okay.
So, it's Dr. Dwight.
Yeah, I suppose, yes.
Also...
Let's go with David. For the podcast, let's go with David.
We'll just stick to David. Okay. But I think that it gets even more interesting. Okay. I did some digging.
Oh, wow.
So,
David...
David...
who you talked to.
Well, David was the 2023 club champion at pickleball.
Oh, gee whiz.
With who was your partner for
My
that?
wife, Elizabeth. Yeah.
Wow.
Okay.
So that's great. Congrats about that. I don't know about 2024 if there's still if y'all didn't make the cut or what happened.
We did not play in the tournament in 2024.
Okay, but if you did, you probably would have won.
Who knows?
I've heard you're great at grilling swordfish.
You talked to my wife.
Well, I don't know. I did some digging. You also were in an a cappella choir in high school.
That's true.
I think we get some of the singing every now and then on staff. You'll sing a little bit. It's good. It's good. And then you have 2 children and a dog. The children might think you love the dog more.
Mm-hmm.
But any thoughts on that? What would you say to them?
Well, dogs are expensive too. I'm a dog lover. Our kids are in their 30s now. And so we are in the empty nest stage of life. Elizabeth and I are. And we had an Australian Shepherd that we had for years, a beloved family dog named Dodger. Dodger died a couple of years ago. So we had to have a little bit of grief recovery time. But we have gotten a new dog. And his name is Clive. So he's named after C.S. Lewis, because many people may know that C.S. in his name is Clive Staples Lewis. So anyway, our new dog is named Clive.
I love that.
I'm pretty convinced he's not as bright as C.S. Lewis. He might not be as bright as a lot of other dogs, but nonetheless, he's a fun guy and a nice addition to the family. That's
very cute. Yeah, I've seen pictures. He's a very, very cute dog. So anyways, today we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about contemporary life in America. We're going to cover some stuff related to media, related to some social issues, and we're going to try to do something a little bit different. A lot of people talk about these things, and things get pretty fiery. So I think we're going to try to have a different conversation, or at least the tone of it is different. And we're going to look at things through the lens of the gospel, through the lens of the Bible, and see if we can, have a helpful discussion and talk about how to navigate some of these things. You know, almost every letter in the New Testament starts out talking about peace. Mm-hmm. Peace be with you.
Mm-hmm. Grace and peace.
Grace and peace.
From God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But there doesn't seem to be a whole ton of peace in America. Mm-hmm. And even, I look myself in the mirror, and within me, there's a lot of tension and all kinds of a bird nest of emotions and feelings and thoughts. Mm-hmm. And especially when looking at the things that are happening in America. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know. I think we want to talk about some of those things today. Yeah. Any thoughts initially to tee up this conversation?
When you mentioned how many of the letters in the New Testament start with grace and peace, I studied that little question a number of years ago, and I think that phrase, grace and peace to you from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ, appears 17 times in the New Testament letters. Now, quickly, in my mind, we come to an interesting question. Those words are written to believers. Grace and peace to you from God our Father and Lord Jesus Christ. The New Testament makes and it operates under the clear assumption that there is a different realm, which is the realm of Christian citizenship. And by that, I don't mean a Christian who's a citizen of the United States. I mean Christian citizenship where Philippians says we are citizens of heaven. And so the picture of the New Testament for a Christian is, I live in the United States, but my citizenship is in heaven. Heaven is my lasting, permanent home. The United States of America is my temporary home. I feel pretty confident that that's a New Testament idea and distinction. So even that starts the ball rolling on how do I see my life? How do I see my citizenship? How do I see my social and civic activity? I think that's important. I also think the New Testament acknowledges a clear distinction between the church, that is, the people who are believers in Jesus Christ, where Christ is their Lord and Savior, and the surrounding secularized culture. There are many clarities that make this distinction in the New Testament. So, I live in a large, pluralistic, secular culture. As a Christian, my life, my identity, my hope are not in that larger, secularized culture. My life, my identity, my hope are in Jesus Christ and in the gospel of Jesus Christ and all that God is inviting me into in an intimate life with Him, with a hope that my eternity is in heaven with Him. And so this might adjust my perspective a little bit. Jesus' phrase, people who are familiar with the Bible may remember, this appears in the different Gospels. Jesus was asked, do you think it's permissible to pay taxes to Caesar? Okay. Now, in those days, the Jewish people despised the Roman occupation. It was godless. It was pagan. It was, in the eyes of Jewish people, it was just the worst kind of government authority possible. So when a Jewish leader asked Jesus, is it acceptable to pay taxes to Caesar? They're trying to trap him.
They thought they had him.
They thought they had him.
Yeah.
As often happens, Jesus gives a genius answer. But his answer is, he says, show me a coin. Whose picture is on it? Caesar's. He says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's.
Right.
I think this is a really, really important and very far-reaching in its implications statement about life for believers who live in larger surrounding cultures like we do. So I think what Jesus is saying there is there are two operative governing realities at this time in history. He's acknowledging that there is an earthly government. It's secular, it's not God-honoring, and it is the Roman government. And he is also recognizing that there is the kingdom of God, that is where God governs. That doesn't happen so much in a civic or legislative public governing way. That happens in the hearts of people who make God their Lord and King. So what I think Jesus is saying when he says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's.
Right.
We live in this era where two realms coexist. There is the larger secular earthly realm of Caesar, or you could say in our country of the United States government. And there is the kingdom of God, which is that kingdom to which my heart is most devoted and most belongs. God is my king, not Washington, D.C. or the president. My hope is in God. It's not in Washington, D.C. or politics or politicians. This is not to say that politics don't matter. They do matter. We all know that. And paying attention to politics and participating in ways that are civic participation and responsibility is a really good thing to do. But what I think a Christian, and when I say a Christian, I mean a person who really is devoted to God as the Lord of their lives, what I think as Christians that we have to really pay attention to is, am I allowing myself to let my politics and social issues become my God? Mm-hmm. They are the most important thing to me, the highest thing to me. Or is God actually God, the most important thing, the highest thing to me?
Right.
So that's my opening batch of thoughts.
Yeah.
When I consider this huge tumbleweed of topics that are bound up in what we're about today.
I mean, already it's so helpful, that response from Jesus of give to Caesar what's Caesar's and give to God what's God's. It brings a lot of clarity. It's very, also too, it's just one of those things that, you're little, you get into an argument with friends in elementary school and you go home and you're like, oh, if I just said this,
right.
It's just the perfect thing to say. But so it brings up a question in my mind of ownership. Who do I belong to? Mm-hmm. And how do I distinguish? I think most Christians would say, who are trying to follow God, would say, of course, I belong to God first. Mm-hmm. But how do we maybe diagnose or figure out, do I actually believe that? Mm-hmm. Or am I operating under this subconscious belief that I belong to this like American society, and I don't know, the real God of my life is politics and that. Do you have some thoughts about that?
Yeah. If I say that I belong to God, how do I know if I really belong to God, or if I actually belong, if I'm giving my loyalty and my highest to something other than God? Mm-hmm. This will get quite subjective here, and so I don't want to speak to this as though I have the authoritative answer on it.
Right, yeah.
I have some thoughts about how, as Christians, we might try to do the spiritual work of trying to get at, okay, I'm saying this about my life, but is that actually true? Mm-hmm. Like, it's easy for us to deceive ourselves. It's easy for us to say things that I hope to be true, but they're more aspirational than actual. Mm-hmm. So, when somebody says, you have a conversation with somebody, or maybe you and your wife have a conversation, and you say, you know what, I'm just not going to worry about this.
Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting phrase.
It is.
The reason I say I'm just not going to worry about this is because I know I'm going to worry about it.
Right.
Right. And so it's pretty odd, right? We say, I'm just not going to worry about this. Really? You're not? Then why are you churning on this and staying up all night?
Yeah.
Because I actually am worrying about it. So the phrase, I'm just not going to worry about it, it's a little effort to try to coach ourselves out of worrying about it. But we only use it when we're actually really worrying about something.
Right.
Right. So it's this kind of challenge of figuring out what's really going on inside of us as human beings. Mm-hmm. My sense would be some little things that might be helpful to pay attention to. If we want to be Christians who are doing spiritual diagnostics, mm-hmm. What are the things that get you most emotional? What makes you most angry? What makes you most worried? What makes you most agitated? We might want to pay attention to that and ask, okay, if I can answer what makes me most angry, most worried, most agitated, mm-hmm. It's quite possible that those things are actually my highests. Okay?
Interesting.
And I'm not saying this in an indicting way, mm-hmm. like, oh, you're a bad person, those are your highest. If we want to make this podcast different than everything that is populating every outlet out there these days, mm-hmm. That's all about anger, outrage, condemnation, and contempt. those are like the words of our culture these days. Anger, outrage, condemnation, and contempt. That's what is in the air in America.
Yeah, you can feel it. It's just, yeah, anytime there's a big thing that happens in the news, you go into work or into the store or maybe even just back home with family and you're kind of a little bit on edge of like, oh gosh, like I don't know what to say about such and such, or I don't know. It stirs you up and winds people up.
Well, this anger and outrage becomes the expected norm in the cultural air. So if you have a conversation about the kinds of things we're talking about, if you don't do it with anger and outrage, people are going to think you don't get it or you're missing the point.
Do you really care about X,
you must
Y,
not
Z?
really care about it.
Right.
Well, what if your thinking, the way you look at things and interpret them and how you see them, and what if your emotions, what if your thoughts and your emotions are not primarily subject to these cultural norms around us? They actually do belong to God. If that's true, it's possible that we can have greater peace and a different perspective. And so we don't need to fall into the cesspool of the shouting match that only knows identity politics and outrage interactions. So I feel like the culture would benefit from having some saner voices and from people who can reason through these things and do it with a kind of calm peace and perspective that's different than all the anger, outrage.
Right.
The problem is that kind of voice in a culture of outrage is not going to get given an influential position. But it's the exact kind of voice the culture needs if we're going to find any healing. So this becomes part of the catch-22.
Right.
We need calm voices, but the culture demands outrage. So the calm voices won't be heard, the voices we actually need, and only the outrage voices will be heard, the voices that just make things worse.
Right. And no one, it just feels like there's no time for nuance or time for people to think about things, to, like figure stuff out and have a more clear thought and run things, to pray, to actually pray about things, to look, what does Scripture say about whatever's going on.
Right.
And people want the clips, the most salacious and like the fiery of this person got destroyed, this person got owned, like those kinds of things. And that, just being very honest, like it kind of makes sense why people want that, of like, it's like junk food, it's like, this is fun, this is exciting, but the trap of junk food, the trap of this stuff is there's consequences to engaging with this and interacting with this.
So if the current climate in our culture is outrage, contempt, condemnation, etc., in the New Testament, Paul uses the phrase, the spirit of the age. He says, the spirit of the age has blinded the minds of unbelievers so they are not able to see the light of the gospel in the glory of Christ. Okay, but this phrase, the spirit of the age, is significant. I think the spirit of the age that we're currently in are these words we're talking about: outrage, identity politics, contempt, condemnation, etc. So a really, really important call to a disciple, in my opinion, is to not allow your heart to get corrupted by the spirit of the age. How will I keep from falling into that? I use the word cesspool. It kind of is a cesspool.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
It's just a terrible mess of junk.
Yeah.
To use a permissible word. So how do we not do that? Is there any place where a Christian can participate in these challenging topics with a completely different countenance? Could you possibly do that? And if you could, what would enable you to do that? I think it would be that you don't have the same fears that a lot of people have. You don't have the same insecurities that a lot of people have. If a secular culture is susceptible to certain fears and insecurities because they don't have a sense that there is a good God who is Lord of everything, that my life and my identity are found in him, that I am completely secure in him, and that my eternity is completely secure in him, then all I've got is politics, shouting, yelling, and social strife. That's all I've got.
Right.
So if Christians have a peaceful interior, presumably it gives us a perspective to spread that peaceful interior to the exterior and possibly become peacemakers. But it's going to take work for Christians to do this. If a person says, well, I'm a Christian, but they're beginning to realize their highest are politics, their political parties, the issues and all that, and they're self-diagnosing, gosh, I am a Christian, but I realize my highest, which means my religion. I'm going to use the word religion as my highest.
Yeah.
My religion is politics and social issues. So I can be a regular church-going person who reads my Bible, and then the lights go on, and actually what I realize is my religion is actually politics and social issues.
Right.
And this Christian thing, this church-going thing, this Bible reading thing, it's become some kind of a habit. It's a thing I do. It's an appendage in my life, but it's not my highest devotion. So part of the invitation and the call to Christians is, how do I make God my highest devotion? Because he's the only place I can really find peace and really find hope. If I make politics and social issues my highest devotion, then I'm going to be swimming in the cesspool. And the anger and the unhappiness and the condemnation and the contempt is going to take hold of my heart. Now, here's the thing. I think the stuff that's in the cesspool, the spirit of the age, is very tempting. And I mean it literally. We are tempted by it.
Oh, yeah.
Like we are tempted to want to watch it, see it, listen to it, go into it.
It's a car wreck. Everyone slows down of like, oh my goodness, I gotta, what just happened?
It's exactly right. It's something that you know is really hard to see. You actually don't want to see somebody lying on the pavement with blood coming out of their body.
No.
But you're tempted by this, I think the word is grotesqueness.
Yeah.
If you really can think about what the word grotesque means. There's another phrase for the same idea, and it's also grotesque. It's like you're out for a walk in the park, and you see a snake trying to swallow a squirrel. The snake has killed a squirrel. You can't not watch it. It's grotesque, and you almost can't watch it. You want to turn away, but you can't turn away. It's so grotesquely fascinating that you can't seem to turn yourself away from it. It's a little bit like, so we've got the idea going here. So one of the things that Jesus taught us to pray is, Lord, lead us not into temptation. I do think allowing our emotions, I'm trying to be quite intentional about my words, to fall into the temptations that comes with identity politics and contempt, it is tempting. It's like a drug. And so how am I going to not keep taking this drug? This drug is harming me.
Right.
How am I going to not keep taking this drug? What disciplines, what things will I pay attention to avoid the temptation that I feel to fall into this drug? So, I mean, millions of thoughts, but I'll stop there for that point.
That's great. I mean, there's two thoughts that come to mind. Maybe one's like more of just a personal little story recently, but one thought is to give a little bit of, I don't know if credit or just I think I understand why it's not like people are dumb. I think the desire and the motivation to be involved in politics and these discussions, I think it actually comes from a really great place, and it's a desire that I think might even be put in us from God, if we desire like the perfect kind of government that takes care of people, it takes care of me, alleviates fear, the kind of like the idea of the benevolent king, like the perfect, righteous, everyone wants justice, everyone wants to be taken care of. And then the part where it gets really, people get tangled up and it becomes life or death is if this life is it, then we better get things right now. There's this urgency, this anxiety that is created. And the difference between that and keeping in like an eternal perspective of, I love the Francis Chan rope illustration where he takes a giant long rope to symbolize eternity and puts a little piece of red tape.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is right now, like our life. So we can filter everything through the lens of, we have all of eternity to look forward to.
Right.
What things actually matter.
Right.
I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
Well, when you're talking about eternity that way, what you're really talking about is perspective. Mm-hmm. And around our church, if Hope people are listening, some of these things I'm about to say, they probably have heard me say before, but the Bible wants to get our attention a lot to help us understand that our life is very short. Mm-hmm. And we are here for just a breath of time. That's a perspective issue that can help shape our perspective of these things. I think I've used maybe on the podcast in the past the phrase, the inflation of recency. I don't remember who said this. I heard it a number of years ago. I may have read it somewhere. The inflation of recency means we're always inclined to believe that our times are the most, the superlative. The recent times, the times we're in, they're the superlative times. So they're either the worst they've ever been,
right,
or just take whatever catastrophization, and we're just always sure that our times are the worst.
Yeah.
So as we're sitting here, I'm trying to be thoughtful. You and I have decades of age gap between us. That's going to be an interesting thing about how we both see the world.
Right.
You're at an age and stage of your life, and at your age, you're seeing things in a generalized way, a certain way. Mm-hmm. I'm at a different age and stage, so I'm seeing things in a generalized way, a different way, right? As you talked about sort of the perfect government, and I'm trying to listen closely to the words you're using, you use the word, we all want justice, and we all want to be taken care of. Now, here's where this becomes a real listening thing.
Yeah.
Your phrase, taken care of, gets my attention. And I'm not evaluating it as good or bad.
Yeah.
I'm listening to it to say, how do we understand each other? Because being taken care of by the government is never a thought that I've ever had, I don't think, in my life. That the government has a job to take care of me. Now, I realize that this concept is in the air, and many, many people have varying ideas.
Yeah.
Right? Now we're into an interesting conversation.
Right.
What is the government's role in terms of helping provide for its citizens? And does helping provide have actual monetary consequences? Or does it simply mean we're going to try to help provide a society that is just and democratic so that everybody has equal opportunity? So we don't actually, the government doesn't actually have monetary involvement in the lives of a person. It's simply to try to create fair, level playing field freedoms, and right? This is the kind of stuff when I say, I think we want similar things,
Right.
but people will have different ideas about how do you achieve them.
Yeah.
Right? So, what is the role of government in the life of citizens? That's a massively huge question. And I'll use a little phrase, but you ask 100 Americans, you probably get 100 different answers.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then you've got, let's use the phrase. See, words get tricky because we all have our preconceived notions and we all have emotional triggers. But let's use the phrase big government and small government.
Okay.
Some people would say we need big government because we need the government to be involved to help things go the right way.
Regulate things. You just keep an eye, certain checks in place.
Right.
Right.
Other people would say we need small government, that government is the problem, not the solution.
Right. A bunch of people with messy hearts trying to run things, different interests getting involved.
Right.
It gets a little dicey.
Right. So the normal way human brains reason is they go to extremes, right? So one extreme, small government, would be the government, like pick the absolute minusculest role government could have in a society, right? And even if I opened, what does that look like? We're already going to be in a debate, right?
Yeah.
Take the maximalist, right? And I suppose you're going to get to some picture of a hardened, crackdown, communist, controlling culture, right?
Right, yeah.
Most of America, statistically, this is true. Most of America is not on the polarities and the extremes. Most of America is not on the far hardened right or the far hardened left.
Right.
There is a big, broad middle. But even when you say that, you recognize, well, the middle is wide as well.
It's very wide.
Right.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, I think you could, in the massive complexities of what we're trying to talk about, say the people in the middle probably share a lot of similar ideas and hopes about government. But once you start saying, well, what are the policies and the practices that would make that government effective?
Yeah.
You're going to start getting very different ideas about that.
Yep.
Let's take a couple of very simple axiomatic American phrases. The Pledge of Allegiance, right? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the government for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Right? I was raised, when I was a kid, we said the Pledge of Allegiance in school. So let's get to what I think is the meat and potatoes of it.
Okay.
One nation under God, with liberty and justice for all. Okay? Would most Americans believe in that? Well, today we might not get much agreement on the one nation under God.
Yeah.
So that's going to be in question today. The idea with liberty and justice for all. I'm going to just say, people can listen and disagree. I'm going to say, I think most Americans would say they agree with that. They want liberty and justice for all. Do you agree with that? The broad middle, I think, would say, yes, we agree with that. Whether you're white or black or rich or poor, I think most people would say, yes, we agree with that. Liberty and justice for all. The question then is going to be, what are the best ways to bring that about? And that's where you're into policy differences. So what I'm hopeful for is we can find at least a common humanity where we say, we all care about this, right? We all care about liberty and justice for all. Yes. Okay, let's be human together and say, good, we all care about that. Now, we do have different opinions on the best ways to enable that. And so this is how it goes, right?
It's so tricky because, for me, I think it just, as I'm thinking through this, I want to know, what would Christ do in this situation? How would he vote? And is Jesus a Republican, or is he a Democrat or a Libertarian or a socialist? Who knows?
Yeah.
And it's just there's this like false dichotomy of like, it's all of these ideas on the left are better than all these ideas on the right, where, like you're saying, there's somewhere in the middle, and there's all these different ideas of how to do things. Everyone wants a similar thing. So yeah, it gets a little bit tricky.
In our innate insecurity and fear, which I think certain innate insecurities and fears are resident in every human being, we have this desperate desire to be right. We have this desperate desire to feel that we're right. So your thoughts, your questions, right, about how would Jesus vote? Would he be a Republican or a Democrat? On the one hand, that's a smiler. I mean, that's like, that's just almost funny. But I get it. I get it. Of course, that thing, and I say this with you because
Yeah.
I'm in this too. That's just like a classic American Christian idea, which is I need to peg Jesus down as a Republican or a Democrat.
Yeah.
Right. And I really hope he lands in the party that I happen to belong to.
That'd be nice.
That'd be nice. But whoops, what if he landed in the party that I don't belong to?
Oh, no.
If I say I'm a Christian, okay, Republican or Democrat, and Jesus walks in and lo and behold, we find out he's in the other party.
Maybe I can change his mind.
Maybe. Or maybe I change my party. Or, right, so it gets a
Yeah.
little ridiculous. I don't think there is anything profitable, and we can laugh about this together.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything to gain when we're like, well, I'm a Republican and so is Jesus. Well, I'm a Democrat and so is Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no fruit in that. That just becomes a spinning top that goes nowhere.
Right. I mean, that's too part of the thing. One of the things I like about Hope since I've been here, very focused on the gospel. I think every Sunday I hear almost the full gospel, most of the time the full gospel. And so just focused on the most important like kingdom things.
Yeah.
And not to say that these issues don't matter. Of course they matter. They matter to Jesus. Like you read it all through the gospels.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think his ways of addressing those things and doing like kingdom work, they're so different.
When Jesus walked the earth, he lived in massively inflammatory political times. He lived in a tinderbox of Roman occupation over this Jewish populace, and the electricity in the air of the hatred of this Roman government was palpable everywhere. And people would try to peg Jesus down politically. And I'm always a little bit intrigued when Christians are working really, really, really hard to peg some Christian attachment to their politics. Jesus, he was an equal opportunity offender. He never satisfied people who wanted to grind their own axe and get him to be the advocate of how they were grinding it. So when he was asked, is it okay to pay taxes to Caesar? The Pharisees who wanted to trap him in the question are wanting, if he says yes, then he says, you're an advocate of this abominable, God-forsaken government. You have no place in the Jewish tradition or Jewish belief. If he said no, they would report him to the Roman authorities and say, this guy undermines the Roman government. Their questions wanted to trap him with a damn if you do, damn if you don't answer. His ability to think on his feet, like you said earlier, is quite remarkable. Dallas Willard is very big in his books about talking about how smart Jesus is. His ability to think fast on his feet and say genius things is really breathtaking. I think most of us Christians who study Jesus, so to speak, miss this. We've never really looked at him with the lens of how smart he is. Okay, so what should Christians think, or what should they do, or how should they look at the political realm?
Especially too when it feels like to be trying to follow Jesus. My identity is like a son of the Most High King. You kind of can feel alienated from all parties of like nothing is quite aligned with what Jesus like in the kingdom are pointed towards.
If I could say it, and I don't know if people will go with me on this. If I could say it, when I observe Jesus in these types of topics, he engages, but he engages in a way as though he's above it all. I'm not threatened by it. I'm not pulled down into it. Now, of course, he's Jesus, right? So he is above it all. But I do think, if I could say it, there is an opportunity for a Christian to have a peaceful presence because, in a sense, you are above it all. I'll tell you a little story. A couple of weeks ago, I was on a flight coming home in the evening. Okay, we're in the middle of summer in the South, coming home in the middle of the evening, and we're flying like 30,000 feet. So the pilot says, we're gonna go a little bit higher. There's some storms, and we're gonna fly over them. So he said the storms are at like 15,000 feet, and even though we were at 30, he said we're gonna go up about another 5,000 feet, and we'll be fine. So we're flying higher, and I can look out my window. It was actually really cool. I can see this huge expanse of dark, heavy clouds, and I can see the lightning absolutely bursting in these clouds.
Wow.
And it's like 20,000 feet below us. And I can see the lightning bursting in it. Now I'm in a plane. I can't hear the thunder and stuff, but presumably thunder and heavy rain. And what's so interesting is if I was outside in my backyard or I was out in some field somewhere and a storm like that is over my head, I'm scared. I'm running for cover. I'm anxious. I'm nervous. In the airplane, I took a video of it because it was so cool the way you could see the lightning in the clouds.
Yeah.
And I am completely peaceful. Why are you completely peaceful? Because you are safe from that storm. In fact, you're flying above it. You're flying above it. This sounds really weird, but I do think the New Testament is inviting us to this idea. Washington, D.C., and the White House and the Capitol is not the most important place. It's got a lot of propped up political symbols of power, but it is not the most important thing in the world. And so our residency and our security in Christ, in a sense, if the culture is all those thunderstorms, we can see them, we can recognize them, we can participate appropriately in them, but we can also fly. It's hard for me to come up with a word, but the idea I'm trying to convey is we can fly above them and have a peaceful sense of it, even though these storms are there. Now, if we can have that peaceful sense, we have the opportunity to work for reconciliation. Studies will say that human beings innately are emotional first. We are triggered and operate first on emotions, not first on our thoughts. We respond to and we are beholden to our emotions before we are beholden to our thinking and our thoughts. It's no secret, lots of studies, politics, sociology, people are inclined to vote for a candidate who emotionally moves them. They are not first examining their policies to see if they think their policies are wise and best for the country. Most people will vote on how the candidate emotionally affects them. Okay, so this can be good and bad, right? And when I say this, right now, right, we have two people that are going to be running for president, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump.
We should probably say we're recording in August.
Yeah.
In case, week by week, things
we're
can
recording
change.
in August 2024. Yeah, who knows? It may change. Unless something really unusual happens.
Right.
The next president is probably going to be either Donald Trump or Kamala Harris. They both engender a lot of emotional passion for them and against them, right?
I don't know why. Sorry.
So people who are emotionally for them tend to be passionately emotionally for them. Once we allow our emotions to override any of our sensibilities, I think we're at risk. We can no longer listen to another person on the other side. We can't appreciate them. We're not interested in hearing their perspective, which is essential for reconciliation and a harmonious civic life. We don't care. All they have to do is say one of those trigger words, and it triggers all that emotion in us, and we just default to the emotional inflammation, and we don't make any progress. Nobody's listening to anybody. Nobody's trying to understand. You know, when they have presidential debates, have you ever heard one of them say to the other, "That's a really interesting idea. Can you tell me more about that so I could understand it better?" Presidential debates are positional shouting matches.
Yeah.
Nothing is debated. It's just point after point after point after point of platform position.
Yeah.
So it's not a debate.
I think even to some of the platforms we're on now, the way that the content, the media, the videos are being put out,
Yeah.
their clips are getting shorter and shorter.
Yeah.
Because it's so fun. Our brains like to see something after another. So the more zingers, the more like witty lines I can throw.
Yeah.
There's just
I really want people to consider this. It really is a drug.
It is.
And this kind of drug is not good for us. And I really want people who really want to be disciples of Jesus to give that some real thought.
Yeah. And there's these entities, these big multinational corporations that have an interest in keeping us glued to our phones. You know, it gets a little bit out there, but I really do think that, you know, you can really look to the ultimate enemy, Satan. Of course, he wants to keep us angry, divided,
right,
upset, and more prone to turn away from God. And so, yeah, there's all these things that are putting a wedge between us and our neighbors, and even a wedge between us and ourselves, how we view ourselves, and
right. That's right.
where we find our identity. And it goes back to the give to Caesar what's Caesar's, and to God what's God's.
Right.
What is my identity? Who actually owns me?
Right. So, a quick story, and then let's talk a little bit about this relative to the church. I was in the grocery store a little while back, and this man, I'm going to say he was, I don't know, mid-50s, walked up to me, and he said, "Hey, are you the pastor at Hope Church?" I said, "Yes." And I introduced myself. "Hi, nice to meet you. My name's David." He said, "Hey." And I said, "Have you been to Hope?" And he said, "Once." Which is a little bit intriguing, right? Like, once. What's the story behind the once?
Yeah.
So he said once, and he said, "And I've never forgotten it." Now I'm like, uh-oh.
Oh.
I mean, like, either he had a bad experience or what happened.
Just hopefully it was last Sunday.
So, no.
Oh.
This was a number of years ago.
Uh-oh.
Because he commented on something that I remember.
Oh, boy.
He said, "I've been there once." He said, "You were preaching." Of course, now I'm really insecure.
Oh, boy.
And he said, "You said one of the most memorable things I've ever heard a preacher say." Okay, now I'm intrigued. I think he's going to say something. Now I'm a little less scared because I think he's going to say something positive.
Back and forth. Yeah. You're just in the grocery store when this is happening?
Yeah. I mean, you know, we're like aisle 4 in front of the, lima beans or something.
Okay.
And I said, "What was it?" He said, "You said the first work of a disciple is to not allow hatred to grow in their hearts." Now, if you're a preacher and you try to be intentional about your words, some of these things you remember, I remember it exactly. And what was also very interesting to me is he got it exactly the way I said it.
Oh.
A lot of times people will say, "Hey, you said this in your sermon." And personally, I'm like, "It's not what I said. It's not how I said it. It's not the words I used."
Yeah.
Right? But he said, "You said the first work of a disciple is not allow hatred to grow in our hearts." And he said, "Do you remember that?" I said, "Yeah, that was a number of years ago." He said, "Yep." And he said, "It was really, really impactful for me." And he thanked me for it. Well, anyway, I do believe that. So the American political climate right now is being fed on hatred and contempt and emotion, emotion-driven stuff.
Yeah.
How do we fly above that storm? So we're not disregarding it. We recognize it, but how do we fly above it? So back to the church, Jake, you talked about hearing the gospel. I have a lot of people who tell me I should talk a lot more about politics. I read a lot about politics. I'm interested in politics. I mean, I was a political science major in college, so I'm interested in politics. But politics are not my God. And I want the church, and I believe this now on pretty deep conviction, the church is the body of Christ that God has called into being to testify to Jesus and the glory of the gospel. That's what the church does. No other organization does that. There are thousands of organizations that talk about politics and are in the midst of the political fray. There are thousands of talking heads and podcasts, maybe like ours, thousands of talking heads, right? There's no shortage of it. Now, I have people who have been critical that I don't talk more about politics. Here's what I think happens often in churches. You talk about politics, and very quickly the lines are drawn, and a church becomes a religious political club. And it will either be on the right or on the left. So your church is either going to be a Democratic Party religious club or a Republican Party religious club. And before you know it, the whole thing caves in on politics. So now we've lost the gospel. We've lost the transforming power of the gospel in people's lives. We've lost the healing power, the forgiveness, and all these beautiful gifts of the gospel because we too fell into the cesspool of the political fray. So I don't, let me say this with a little bit of care. A person's political party, I don't care that much about what a person's political party is who comes to Hope. I'm not interested in Hope being a Republican club or a Democrat club. I'm interested in it being a vital, beautiful place of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And what I want to urge people to do is seek their deep life in Christ, grow their perspective through a deep engagement of Bible reading, and participate in politics and civic life, voting what you think is best, but with a mindset of being aware of the temptation that politics can creep in and become my highest devotion. And as Christians, that's not where we want to go. So that's like a little bit of David Dwight's treatise on the church and politics and talking politics and all that kind of stuff. Do I have viewpoints on a lot of social issues? 100%. Political parties have changed, back to your age and my age. Political parties, the ground of what the parties stand for and what they believe has changed quite a bit since I was your age. And so a Republican in 1980 and what that person said was important to them and what they believed, the Republican Party of 2024 and what it says is important to it and what it believes, it has some of the same things, but many very different things. Same thing, I think, with the Democratic Party. So it's interesting to me to watch what's happening in the world and the who's on which side of the political aisle today and say, wow, that is so different. 30 years ago, I think that on that issue, the parties would have been flipped.
You'll hear people say, I'm a classical liberal or people, it's interesting, these shifting views and how things change. I mean, I don't know. I've only been around for so long.
Well, and that's normal. That's always going to be the case.
Yeah.
Right. So if we thought politics and the parties was some bedrock of truth and righteousness, politics and the parties are going to change for political reasons. And those are vast and complex, and they're driven frequently by political reasons.
And maybe some money gets mixed in there too.
Sure. Money and power gets mixed in there dramatically.
Right.
Right? And you know the old story, right? Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yep.
So this is where I think you want to be really vigilant to these types of concerns.
Yes. The a story and then one other question related to this. I get coffee with my friend Ford every morning. He's I love him. And we try to talk about like how we're doing, some just some accountability things and talk about like scripture together. I mean, it's a great friendship. We get to celebrate his wins in ministry and mine too. So when it was like an early morning, and he just noticed, he's like, you just seem heavy. You seem like the way you're talking about things, there's like more despair in your life. And I was like, yeah, I think I've just been so sucked into the news cycle, and it's gotten out of control. Like I'm like, am back on all these sites, like looking at this stuff. And if I were to like step on a magical scale, and it has on one end despair, one end hope, in that moment, I think because of all the stuff I was consuming, like it would have leaned heavy into despair. And so I guess the question is, and like the good news is, since he's like, why don't you just delete the apps? Like it's pretty easy. And I'm glad he's a good friend to just say that. I'm like, of course, you're right, Ford. I should do that. So I did. And for the past couple of weeks, maybe a month and a half, I mean, I felt like way better.
Right.
Just way better. And my counselor he recommended, it might be good to like read journals instead, like just quarterly, and like they're written in a way that you can look back when more of the things have rolled out.
Yeah.
Like there's a difference between reading something and watching something that's super emotional.
Oh, listen, you're hitting a soapbox for me there. Mm-hmm. I try to avoid news and politics when it's on screens. Everything from the way the screen flashes to the tone of voice to the background music, the intensity, the big flashing words that come on the screen.
Right.
All of that is distorting and disturbing, and it just unsettles your soul. So generally speaking, I'm old school, but this is for a purpose. I read the paper.
Yeah.
And I want to get my news and information by reading it, not by listening to people yelling on a screen. The tone of voice and the stridency and the animosity and all of that, I just don't think is helpful at all. So I read my news. And I think that's something to consider.
Yeah, it's so funny to think that you can almost have the same idea communicated, but the channel which it's delivered, it does have an impact on our emotions.
That's right. Yeah, so most people I know wish that the two people running for president were not the two people that we have. Just wish they didn't have to vote for one of these people.
Right.
They wish they had somebody other, different, somebody that gave them more hope, more confidence for lots of different reasons. But likely this is who we have. Mm-hmm. So this becomes a challenging question too, right? Because you can say, well, I don't like either one of the candidates. So what are you going to do? You're not going to vote. For me personally, this is just the way I think. A lot of people have given their lives to preserve a democracy for my right to vote. So for me to say I'm above these people, I am better than these people, so I'm not going to vote, it's a temptation, but for me, other people can do it and it can be fine for them. For me, I'm not comfortable with that. And there's a latent pride under it that I don't like. Yeah. I am simply better than these people, and I'm not going to vote for either one of them.
We're sinners saved by grace.
Exactly.
It's the work of Jesus.
Exactly.
It's not anything David did.
And guess what?
Jake
Donald
did.
Trump and Kamala Harris are also sinners like we are.
Yeah.
So for me to separate myself from them so much is like the Pharisee who said, "Thank you, God, that I'm not like this other man."
Oh, no.
And so we are all human. Mm-hmm. And I could name some people who are in the U.S. government and say, man, I wish he or she was running, but they're not the ones running right now. So how do you deal with that? Some people say I'm gonna write in a candidate. Mm-hmm. I hear that and I'm like, I get that, but that candidate's not going to win. I'm just saying Donald Trump or Kamala Harris is going to win. Now, I might do that because it's a call it conscientious objection. And I appreciate that. I
Yeah.
get that. I think it's better than not voting because you're simply saying, I'm above all of this.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's better than not voting, but it's an interesting question because your write-in candidate is not going to win.
Or the third party, say like a RFK Jr.
Right.
Yeah.
He's not going to win. But if democracy says, but I am given the freedom and the right to do that, so I'm exercising my democratic right by either voting for RFK or by writing in a candidate, I see that. I think that's better than not voting because you're, quote, above it all.
It's interesting.
But I do think it's an interesting question because if I'm gonna write a write-in or vote for RFK, the write-in and RFK are not going to win. So who am I helping get elected by the way I've chosen to vote?
Yeah.
Right. So these are interesting questions, and everybody's got to work through that and give some good, thoughtful consideration to it.
Yeah. And not in the whole analogy of being above the clouds, above the storm, not saying that we're better than everyone.
Right.
It's like just saying, kind of a warning of not to get sucked into this dangerous space. And I think that's kind of another problem with all of this. In my mind, I love the analogy of food. I love food and the idea of junk food.
Yeah.
And it's very fun.
Yeah.
Every now and then, it's very fun to eat.
It's tempting.
Yes, a Kit Kat.
Yeah.
Love them. Or Twix. Okay.
Yeah.
But, and even this morning, we were talking in our staff devotions. These are very strong words from Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
You know, eat my flesh and drink my blood. Whoa. That is going to be more difficult to do just in general. And then when you have the two options of that or junk food, chips, sweets, whatever, it's so much easier to just consume those things.
Right. It's a pretty available analogy here, the way you're setting it up.
Mm-hmm.
If much of the way the media is presenting current political and social issues is junk food, and I would say I think it is.
Yeah.
Not all of it, but much of it.
Mm-hmm.
If much of it is junk food, if you eat too much junk food, you feel sick.
Yeah.
If you ate 10 Twix for lunch, you're going to feel sick.
I've done it before.
Okay.
And I felt
so
pretty
you
sick.
know, if you eat political junk food, your soul's going to feel sick.
Right.
And I really would want to urge people, like, that's not a cute story. That's not, oh, that was a fun little analogy that David threw out there. No, I'm actually saying, just as if you eat 10 Kit Kats for lunch, your body's going to feel sick. If you keep taking in junk food politics, your soul's going to feel sick.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm a Christian who wants an intimate, living water relationship with Jesus Christ, I want to avoid stuff that's going to make my soul feel sick.
Absolutely. And it kind of this is a little bit sidebar, but just in my time leading different, especially like high schoolers, a question that is so common is X, Y, or Z a sin?
Mm-hmm.
Is going this far too far?
Right.
And I like always, I feel a lot of, I feel for the people asking that question because I was there. But the question is just, it's so the wrong question.
Right.
It's not so much, how much can I get away with?
Yeah.
What if we asked instead, and I like, Lord, help me with this. What is going to stir up my affections for the Lord more?
Yeah.
What's going to help me fall more in love with him,
Yeah.
become more like him?
Yeah.
And Lord, help me to make those decisions and make the sacrifices. Because the most peaceful person, the most joyful person, the person who had the most full life was Jesus. And that's what I want my life to be like.